Thank you, Nick. Every word that John said, I had to strike another idea from what I was going to say. So I think he gave a fantastic presentation. An anchor institution really is something that attracts people to a place. And if you read the Brookings Institution 2014, they highlighted universities and hospitals. And a university is not a single use. It's a collection of a lot of uses, as is a hospital. We've talked about an airport as a potential anchor. That is also a collection of a lot of different uses. So it's very important to realize these are very, very complex entities. I've been in the business long enough. I've worked with hospitals. I've worked with universities. They are not always the best neighbors to work with. They often are very inward focused. They often are concerned about whatever is their primary function. And for a long time, they were not good neighbors. In the last 15 to 20 years, they've started to realize they become the anchors. They become the attractors. Certainly with respect to universities, they bring in people 24 hours a day, quite often 5 to 7 days a week, very diverse. They have enormous capacity to help determine what a place will be like. I think John hit on one of the key issues, which the mix of uses is incredibly, incredibly important. You cannot have a monofunctional anchor. A business park is not an anchor by itself. In the States, Research Triangle Park, phenomenal, 50,000 researchers. They'd all drive in the morning. They'd all drive out in the afternoon. That went on for 40 years. Now what are they doing? They're adding residential. They're adding hospitality. They're adding retail because they realized the park itself didn't work. I think the mix of the uses, that, you know, how much residential, how much, that's very complicated. And I think we can project, but then 5 years everything changes, so we have to keep morphing. But I think one of the critical issues that we often don't address properly is how they are actually integrated together, the actual physical, on the ground, how things go together. I think in Sydney, I think you have an example here, Macquarie Park, Macquarie University. They don't really relate to one another terribly well. So you have the university, you have that sort of town center anchor, but the physical connection isn't there. And I think that's a huge challenge because you're dealing with a lot of different institutions, you're dealing with government, it's a very complex subject, but when you do it right, the results are spectacular.
Great, thank you. Now I thought we'd move on to Lucy and Deb in the personality side of things, because as John put before, Canary Wharf or Docklands in London, I remember being back there in the early 2000s and it was boring as bat droppings. So I'd like to hear from Deb and Lucy about how you do add that personality to places and what's the key to getting that right.
Well, I think actually that mix of uses and the grain and the walkability is fundamental. And I think Macquarie Park's a really good example of that. I think it's going to evolve into a place where place-based planning is more important. It can't just be a stream of busy roads and business parks. That's a very 1970s, 1980s, early 1990s model, and that's evolving, of course, made very possible with the new metro. So it's that you know, getting that organic quality that the truly amazing health and education precincts, like around Sydney University, now Randwick UNSW, Prince of Wales Hospital campus is becoming a more integrated, collaborative organisational system. And Westmead as well. So, and that's growing as an education precinct as well as just a health precinct. So I think it's really important when you're doing this is to recognise the significance of these anchors, health and education in particular, in the precinct, into the economy, not just the state economy, but the national economy. In Greater Sydney, 20% of jobs will be in health and education by 2036. So we cannot overstress the economic and social significance of these health and education and innovation anchor precincts, and we've got a plan for it.
Yeah, I would entirely agree. And I think the other element of it, when we talk about walkable cities, when we talk about multi-use precincts, is that element of safety is really important. We're asking people to be part of a community, and so how we ensure that that is a really safe, family-oriented environment, how it is a sustainable environment. The previous panel was asked that question around sustainability, and I think as we develop new precincts, people are more and more acutely aware of that and going to be more inclined to participate in an environment where great thought has been given to how does it feel to walk around and you know, what is the vibe of that environment? Does it suit the need? I would also agree with Lucy around that concept of that integration. One of the things we are seeing, for example, in the healthcare space, and it's happening at Randwick at the moment, again, it takes lots of stakeholders with hospitals, you know, multiple layers of government, etc. But you're seeing researchers, scientists, clinicians and patients actually having to be co-located now for agile personalised medicine. So you look at the Children's Comprehensive Cancer Institute that's just been announced in Randwick, and that is about university, hospital, philanthropy, government, all actually coming together and saying, in the best interest of the users of this space, let's co-locate and let's do it in a way that is modern and efficient and clean and sustainable and all those sorts of things. So we need to start thinking about not just who the anchor is, so it's not just the university being the anchor, it's how will they embrace and bring along a whole lot of other users and co-locators for whom the community will then, you know, engage and it will make it a better place to be.
And the nighttime economy is a non-trivial consideration there.
Yeah, that whole concept of clustering. And I think that safety is really interesting as well. I was actually in Brighton in the UK on Monday, and a cab driver said he moved from London to Brighton because he just didn't feel safe. And so I think that's something that's probably underappreciated to a degree. Sam, on the government side of things, how and the regulation, are we doing a good job? Are we setting up the right organisations like yours to lead this, to lead the discussion, to get to where we need to go in terms of the Barangaroos and the Western Sydney Airport and Docklands and Australian education?
Look, I think it's a bit of a Dorothy Dixer in some ways. Of course, I'd say yes to that. We're setting up the right organisations. I think one of the things we're very attuned to now, particularly in our governance, and as you look around the world, Lucy and I were talking about it before, we actually do this sort of development as well as anybody globally now. And when you get out and about, we actually go and look at everybody else, and we've actually set ourselves a target in the Aerotropolis, sort of a soft target. We want to be so good people come and look at what we've done and actually be unabashed at saying, you know what, we've actually done pretty good stuff here. Come and have a look at what we've done. I'm immensely proud of all the health and education stuff that's being talked about. I promised my team I wasn't going to talk about that much today, but you know, Randwick is a really interesting example about how when you actually create that opportunity, that started with a really comprehensive urban master plan that is actually an entire suburb. Not many people have seen that. But I think the other thing that government, and I've had the privilege of learning from people like John and had the privilege of following him through Melbourne Docklands and helped deliver John's vision around that. And you know, I think one of the things we've figured out is actually this is an expertise in government. We actually have to build this as a capability set, and certainly a lot of my focus has been around how do we bring the best and brightest from industry into the government side, because actually that ability to set both sides is critically important. Government regulation in and of itself, frankly, my views on this is government makes decisions to intervene to make these places happen, because on their own, industry won't necessarily deliver these places. But the secret to success is then government actually also getting the heck out of the way and letting industry get on with it. And that's certainly my very clear view about this, is government intervenes to the extent it needs to and no further. And then it really has to get out of the way. And that's often a challenge for governments, I think, to actually get to that point where you actually say, you know what, that organic development's actually okay because it's within a set of guidelines, set of boundaries, but it's not necessarily that perfection. And that's a trick when you're getting to that master plan conversation. And I think one of my key learnings from Docklands was actually, as you go through economic cycles, you know, these are long-term projects. I mean, I had the privilege of being CEO there when we hit the GFC. And I can tell you, we had nothing happening. And all the development agreements were all premised on debt-based funding. All year around in GFC, how much debt-based funding construction did you get done post-GFC? Zero. So we had to rethink the approach. And so that has taught me an awful lot around that resilience in every form of the economy, and actually what you're doing in long-term master plan thinking to actually be resilient and agile to respond to the economic climate. And that's one of the real things about health, and particularly education, is that by and large they're actually not as impacted by the economy. And health is really interesting as well in that it has a diversity of jobs, everything from the highest paid surgeon through the person sweeping the floors, mopping the floors, to the lawyers and the accountants and everybody. It actually offers a diversity of job typologies. And I think that's the other thing that actually when you begin to look at getting away from monotype industry clusters, that's a really important piece, that you actually have that diversity of employment. And that's a privilege for us in the Aerotropolis as we think about how do we capitalise on this little thing that the feds are putting $5.3 billion into called an airport. How do we actually then generate 200,000 knowledge jobs in and around that and actually ensure that we have an economically resilient city that actually provides enormous opportunity and skills development for that community?